one of those publishers ended up coming to us, Vincent, and said, in our hands, your company is worth a lot more because of our distribution ability, because of our capital. Why don't you let us acquire you? Now, they offered us $15 million for the company, and that was worth even more then than it is now. We had just $1 million of investment from a venture capital firm, and the rest was owned by our 4 founders. That would have been game-changing, right, for us.
Here we go, entrepreneurs. We're bringing on Kevon with a ton to bring to us today. At one point, Silicon Valley Business Journal's 40 under 40 list nominee. You may have seen him in Silicon Valley Business Journal. You see him in Entrepreneur Magazine, Modern Health, ABC, CBS, you name it. He's the genius behind Go Check Kids, GenPlay Games, and so much more. Welcome to That Entrepreneur Show.
Vince, so glad to be here.
I'm excited to hear your journey and more. And everyone, he's got a lot of wins, but we're going to talk about how he got there and everything in between. He restarted Go Check Kids as its CEO because vision impairment is the most common reason children don't learn more and eventually achieve more educationally and financially. And he's got a lot of wins for the company, a lot of gains to help move in the right momentum. But then he kept going. GenPlay Games, a leading mobile games developer that generated over $70 million in sales. You heard that right, with pro athletes, Maria Sharapova, Tracy McGrady. I mean, a lot of people from when I were growing up. So I love that. But before we get into that, let me welcome everyone else to That Entrepreneur Show. Thank you for tuning in and keeping this a top 2.5% global show. We're very grateful for you tuning in each week and the amazing guests that come on. Remember to check out comingalivepodcastproduction.com to learn more on getting your journey started today. But today, it's Kevon's journey, and we're going back in time. Why did you want to become an entrepreneur at first?
Hey, Vince, before we go there, you talked about the wins. There's also a ton of losses, right? They just don't make the bio because the bio only has room for so many characters. But a lot of entrepreneurs, I have at least as many losses as wins. Why did I want to become an entrepreneur? A few reasons. One, my dad was a small business owner. My parents were grinding to get us out of poverty, and they did. And so I saw the power of entrepreneurship to change our lives. But I also saw the impact he had on employees, the impact he had on customers, and thought, gosh, what a position of influence to make a difference in the lives of people. My mom, she ended up joining my dad's business, but she was trained as a social worker. And so it wasn't uncommon for us to go volunteer when I was a kid at a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter. And over time, I thought, wow, if I could take her passion for helping people and apply it in the context or the mechanism of entrepreneurship, which is far more scalable than going to volunteer, which is also wonderful, then I could make a huge difference and also provide well for my family.
That's the second part. We're in entrepreneurship. We have to eventually tackle, are we monetizing this? Are we eating food? Are we saving money? And myself, I started as a school speaker. It was great. COVID came. It was more of a hobby because I was not able to consistently monetize it to live my life. So I love how you brought that up. But when you were just getting going, what were some of the more challenging areas of entrepreneurship for you when you were all in?
Let's rewind to when I'm 20 years old. I'm a sophomore in college. The dot-com bust is the dot-com boom, not the bust. The bust hadn't happened yet. The boom was just blazing. Every day you'd open the Wall Street Journal and you'd see another 19, 20, 22-year-old becoming a millionaire. Now, at the time, we thought it was all real, right? It was on paper, and almost all of that wealth, right, in quotes, disappeared. I sat there and thought, why not me? What's keeping me, right, from doing the same thing? So 3 guys on my dorm room floor, we were at Santa Clara University in Silicon Valley at the time, started alldorm.com. We sold over 6,000 products to college students on the internet, inflatable furniture, posters, micro fridges, everything except really books, right, for their college life. Now, a few months after starting the company, the dot-com bust happened. So at that point, it wasn't popular to invest in starry-eyed young entrepreneurs. In
Right.
fact, it was totally out of vogue. So we had this choice, right? Do we continue chasing this dream or do we call it quits? And I remember thinking about how several investors had put in $10, $30, $50,000, some of them over $100,000. And we were at a point where we wouldn't be able to raise any more capital. We didn't have the scale, right, that Amazon does now to support our razor-thin e-commerce margins. So it looked like we were done. I'm not somebody who prays in public, but I was so desperate, I wasn't thinking about where I was. I wasn't thinking about that I was in our office. At the time, we had about 10 people. I literally got under my desk in the office on my knees and said, God, you need to show us how to get out of this mess. Because I just couldn't imagine the shame of letting down all those investors and having their capital really go to nothing. Well, to make a long story short, I had an idea while I was on my knees to put up a dry erase board on everyone's door in their dorm room. And make a long story short, a lady called the next day and said, hey, I have a 2.5 feet by 3.5 foot long dry erase board. Can I sell it through your e-commerce site? Now, I knew that e-commerce business wasn't going to get us to cash flow positive, but we still had it up because we didn't have a better idea. And then I had an idea. Why don't we put advertising on the top and bottom of that door? And that is what became cash flow positive. We went from one university that fall to 200 universities the next fall. And very quickly, our pivot was a 7-figure business working with Volkswagen, Microsoft, AT&T. And, obviously we're in a very different predicament because now we actually had gross margin and we had net profit, right?
You touched on something there, funding, right? Letting down these investors. There's a lot of craze about often, let's go raise capital, let's do this. What is maybe a good fit and maybe a fit that doesn't need funding? If there's a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs where they're like inspired by you, right? You did it, you came back. Maybe investing with some funding isn't for everyone. Can you dive into that for us?
Yeah. There's a few big factors that come to mind as you ask the question, right? So the first one is, how urgent is this market opportunity? Michael Dell talks about literally, he was at the University of Austin and he saw a really short window to create personalized, configurable PCs, laptops that are shipped directly to your house that would make it way more convenient for us as buyers of those laptops than going to the value-added reseller stores that were more expensive and where you couldn't configure the computers in a timely fashion. There was a lot of aspects about that were bad for the purchaser, the consumer, the business buyer, but it was also bad for the manufacturers because these retailers they were in control. They were the ones taking all the profits. So, Michael Dell said, hey, this is urgent. I got to do this now because if I don't, somebody else will. So urgency is the first factor that comes to mind. The second factor is this opportunity one where a lot of capital has to be invested before we can start generating revenue? Or is this one where we can go sell and then use that gross margin to fund the next development, right? So for example, at GoCheck Kids, we were developing AI software before AI was sexy to catch eye diseases in children. Super expensive to develop all the code, of course, to build off the sales and marketing team that would sell to big hospitals and independent pediatricians. We obviously needed to build a product development function, a customer service function. And so I didn't have the cash to just say, all right, I'm going to fund all this, right? We needed to invest a lot more capital than I had at my disposal to build a foundation that we could then go take to market. So we talked about urgency. We talked about how much capital to get going. I think the third factor that comes to mind was just more personal. Do you want to be accountable to investors? Do you want their help, their advice, their perspective? Or do you want to be the lone person making the decisions and sort of just live and die by the quality of your decisions? There's obviously more factors than those three, but those are the first three that come to mind.
Thank you for sharing that. So now I don't want to breeze by too fast. We got to show some love to your companies, right? You just talked a little bit about Go Check Kids, the vision with it, the mission. When did you know it was time to move on to the next business? I hope you're enjoying today's show as much as I am leading the discussion. Remember to subscribe to stay current on our shows.
The first transition was from Aldorm to GenPlay Games. We were one of the first developers of mobile games in the US. This is pre-iPhone, right? And there were a few factors. The first one was I had a business partner at Aldorm that I couldn't see myself working with anymore. We just had very different values. For example, he would lie to investors or prospective employees or customers, and then I would spend time cleaning up the mess. And so I wasn't spending time creating value. I was spending time not covering, but dealing with his track. So for example, I remember one time he told a potential marketer that was applying for a job that we had a particular health benefit.
Right.
And then a week after she joined, she said, "Hey, Kevon, can I talk to you about something?" This other gentleman, we'll call him Gary, he told me that we had this benefit, but I don't see it in the benefit plan. And after talking with him for a little while, I realized that he wanted her to say yes. So he told her that we had benefits that we don't have.
Oh my gosh. That's
I want to live a life of integrity, right?
a nightmare to think about.
I started to change this guy for probably 6 months. And then I realized not just I'm not going to change him, but he might create a big financial liability for me. What if somebody sues us because they feel defrauded, right? That was the biggest factor. Another factor is I had a lot of pride. We were 4 years into the business. I was almost 24. We had lots of press attention, TV, magazines, etc. And my ego had just swollen. And I was thinking, I don't want to be running a national business with medium margins. I want to run an international business with higher margins. Probably should be a software business. And I'm not proud of that, but that's where I was then. I was really immature, right, at 24. And so when Jose, one of the founders of GenPlay Games, said, "Hey, would you start the company with me?" And I had a sense for his values being far more aligned with mine. He was more like the person I wanted to be. It was an easy decision. So those are the main factors that led me to go to GenPlay Games.
I appreciate you sharing everything, because oftentimes entrepreneurs, we have a lot of these crazy ideas, and staying focused on working on one mission until it's correctly timed is another ballgame. I, at one point in the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, I was still wearing all the hats in this business, but also doing real estate, financial advising, still scared to give up my career, right? Doing all these things, but eventually you got to narrow it in. But thank you for sharing that. Now I want to dive into some other things you could help us. What are common mistakes you see business owners make when they try to scale a business?
That's a great question. I think one of the most common mistakes is they try to run the whole organization, the decisions, the plans, the hiring, the firing, through the limited time that they have, instead of pushing out responsibility to people who are actually more capable than them in various areas. And if you spend any time with customers and you spend any time with just looking at what's happening in the market, trends that are taking place, you spend any time on the company's financial wherewithal, making sure you have enough cash in the bank, making sure that the checks and balances are in place, even at the highest level. There's not a lot of time to make decision after decision. I mean, I love how Bezos limited himself to 3 decisions per day. The rest, he forced himself to push down to the team. And of course, there's a cascading factor here that is easy to overlook. If you keep holding all the decisions close, you actually don't let your team develop, because they don't get to live with their victories, their better decisions, and their mistakes. I remember Bob Joss, he was one of the top execs at Wells Fargo. He went on to become a board member at Citicorp. One time he told me that the CEO at Wells Fargo wanted to have enough delegation and enough time in particular roles for his executives so that they could sleep in the beds that they made, right? Again, when they made the bed well, or when they didn't, they had to sleep in it. And that's how they learned. So I think not delegating is one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make that keeps them from scaling well. Another factor is not documenting where we do things. What are our values? What level of financial level can the different employees make decisions on, whether it's, for example, on expenses, on investments, whether it's in sales and marketing or in product development? What are the questions that we're going to ask every potential hire to assess culture fit instead of it just being a totally gut feel factor or method, which is way less reliable? Those are the first things that come to mind.
I love all those things, and company culture has got to be more than a quote behind the desk, right? The CEO. Shout out to Jerry for that one. And you really just opened my eyes, bringing a lot of clarity. So I know everyone else got some clarity too. What else can I ask you? I know we circled back to Go Check Kids, but I want to dive into a little more GenPlay Games. I know you before the iPhones, all that. So that's like super revolutionary, super inspiring. Where were your resources to build? Now we have much more sophisticated internet and smartphones and all these things. You were pre to that. Walk us through just some of that excitement, or I could say excitement now that you're looking back at it, right? I'm sure it wasn't exciting forever.
Yeah. So we started the company of truly a dream that we would have a positive video game company. Our games wouldn't objectify violence. I'm sorry, we wouldn't glorify violence. We wouldn't objectify women. And we would really create a culture of learning, of curiosity, of mentorship. Now, a lot of people who come to work for video game companies, they're coming in as testers, which at the time were minimum wage jobs. A lot of them had come from backgrounds that didn't have a lot of opportunity. And we wanted to create that opportunity where their time at our company would be a stepping stone to a bright career in the video game industry or the software industry. We, at the time when we started, didn't have capital before we eventually raised capital. And so we went to the largest publishers of video games in the US and said, we have the skills to create the best games for the handsets, the phones that existed at the time. You have the distribution, you have the capital. Why don't you invest in games that are our ideas and your ideas, and then we'll share the royalties together.
Boom.
That is what got us momentum to several million in revenue. We then raised a small round of venture capital with investors that we believe were very aligned with us and what we were going after. And it's just one game after another, right? Building the company. One game, one hire, one deal, one licensing arrangement. You mentioned some of the pro sports deals that we did before with Tracy McGrady and some of his friends and Maria Sharapova. We also did games based on Pac-Man, and we helped bring Hubert to market, and many other games that were old retro arcade classics.
Oh, so cool.
One of those publishers ended up coming to us, Vincent, and said, in our hands, your company is worth a lot more because of our distribution ability, because of our capital. Why don't you let us acquire you? Now, they offered us back in, this is 2007. Yeah, they offered us $15 million for the company, and that was worth even more then than it is now. We had just $1 million of investment from a venture capital firm, and the rest was owned by our 4 founders. That would have been game-changing, right, for us. We didn't really think through it well enough, and we didn't have any M&A experts around us, and we ended up declining that offer. Later on, we were in a situation where we were contracted with a major publisher, and they pulled some very powerful moves that we didn't see coming that forced us to sell our company for a lot less. And that was my first experience with mergers and acquisitions. That was the first time I left a lot of money on the table, right, in selling a company. And that's where I developed the passion to protect not only the hard work, but also the legacy, right, of founders, of owners, when it's time for them to sell their company, which ultimately got us to where we are today with legacy outcomes.
Oh, man, I love it. Thank you for the inspiration. Everyone, sit around just a few minutes longer. I promise we're getting his contact info, the websites, everything in between. But you know what time it is, listeners. If you could pick any entrepreneur, Kev, dead or alive, to pick their brain, who would you choose?
One entrepreneur who's really inspired me is Herb Kelleher, the founder of Southwest Airlines. Obviously, Southwest is going through some rough bumps and some major changes right now. But for decades, right, it was the only airline that was profitable every year in and out. And more important than the profit, or alongside the profit, it was a airline that enabled people to get from point A to point B at a lower cost, right, which is so good for us as customers. And they had a culture that the employees absolutely loved, hence why they won award after award after award. So for me, Herb Kelleher did it right. He wasn't just chasing money, and he wasn't just looking for an impact, but not able to actually achieve it, right? Like you said before, the margin actually enables the mission, right? You talked about monetization a few minutes ago. So yeah, Herb's super inspiring for me. I think he is still alive, or maybe he's in kind of his final season of life. But yeah, I would love to spend some time with him and understand what was the source of his grit, his resilience that enabled him to overcome challenge after challenge after challenge. They had near-death experiences like any other company, but their near-death experiences are different because they're dealing with planes and government. It's not just like, oh, we need to ship a little more code, right? They had real infrastructure. It was an industrial-grade company pretty quickly. So Herb Kelleher is probably who I would talk to first.
I love the choice, the big vision thinking. Thank you for sharing that. I'll delve a little deeper here with you, Kev. Where would the meeting go down if you could pick the location too?
I think we should go back to their first airport in Texas. I don't know if it was, I think it was in Houston, and probably just sit out at the gate where their first planes were taken off. I think that would stimulate his memory very just than if we were at some fancy office building that they have today.
The listeners know I love when people pick an area where the guest is comfortable, because I firmly believe that's where the most value will come. While there is never a bad choice to meet someone so powerful to pick their brain, I love your logic there. And I got to thank you, Kevon, for taking some time. Join me here on That Entrepreneur Show. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe to stay current. But you got to also check out what he's got to offer online. Please share where we can find you and your companies.
Yeah, so you can find me on X at Kevon Saber, Kevon Saber. I'm on LinkedIn, same name. And then Legacy Outcomes, our sell-side M&A firm, is legacyoutcomes.com.
Thank you for sharing that, everyone. Be sure to connect with him. He's a great person to have in your corner, and check out all he has on his website. So my name is Vincent A. Lancy. Again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for keeping this show a top 2.5% global show. And a big thank you to our guest today for coming on, sharing his wisdom. And congratulations again on all your success. I look forward to seeing it unravel as we are now connected. But with that, we are signing off today down Nashville, Florida. Here we go. Thank you, Kev.
Thanks, Vince.